And the public wanted change. Certainly the people in Surrey and North Delta wanted change, and they voted that way. And since we were sworn in 7 months ago, we've worked very hard to address the issues that we were hearing about during the election campaign. And the number one issue was affordability. People were struggling to make ends meet, whether it was medical services premiums, whether it was the unfair tolls on the Fort Mann and the Golden Ears Bridge, whether it was increasing ICBC costs. Wherever you look, there were increasing costs on people, but decreasing costs on those at the top. The wealthy 2% got tax breaks, and the rest of us were paying the extra freight. So we set about trying to do something about that. And the first order of business, of course, was to eliminate the tolls. That's putting money directly back into the pockets of people south of the Fraser. That's led to an increased use of the Port Mann Bridge and a decline in use of Alex Fraser and Patella, which takes the strain off that infrastructure. But as we all know, the Patella Bridge is well past its best before date, so I was very proud to announce with my colleagues the replacement of the Patella Bridge, starting with the initial planning phase, which is now underway, and we will be taking over the bridge from TransLink, and that's a big undertaking as well. By doing that, we allow TransLink and the Mayor's Council to focus on the other initiatives that they want to see in the region. Light rapid transit, light rail here in Surrey, more buses north of the Fraser, North Vancouver, more SkyTrain heading towards UBC. Those are significant investments that are long overdue, investments that were not taken by the previous government. In fact, instead, they put in place a referendum that was destined to fail, and we had 4 years of inaction on transportation. If we don't take action on transportation and transportation corridors, it makes it difficult to build the housing that people need throughout the region. And if you can't connect houses with transportation, you're not going to have appropriate infrastructure in place. So after the affordability of the basics pocketbook issues, housing affordability is the number one issue. And we've taken steps in our recent budget, a 30-point plan. Now, I know you all know that conventional wisdom is never have a plan with more than 3 points, because people only remember 2 of them, and you can always make up the third one over and over again. Well, we didn't want to do that. We wanted to make sure that we had a comprehensive plan, a plan that addressed 3 key areas. Demand, where we saw speculation driving up prices. We needed to address supply. We want to make sure that we can keep the construction industry going, and we have people building more and more supply. And lastly, security. People that are renting right now are not sure they're going to have a home at the end of the month, or the month after that, and the month after that. So we've invested significantly in the residential tenancy branch, and we have much more work to do in that regard. I could go on and on about the areas that we've been focusing on, but I know you've got many, many questions. I want to just conclude by saying that the medical services premium will disappear. It's been cut in half as of January 1st and will disappear in 2020, and we will be like every other province in Canada. We will not have a regressive tax that if you make $60,000 a year or $600,000 a year, you pay the same amount. Every other province has found a way to do that. We now have a way to address that through what we're calling the medical services tax that will affect 5% of businesses, not all businesses as the BC Liberals are arguing. 85% of businesses in British Columbia will not be affected by the medical services tax, and only 5% of those remaining will pay the full fare. Many of them are already paying premiums for their employees. So this is a fair way to make sure that we're providing the services people need for healthcare, and it's a way to make sure that those people, small business operators, who were paying the taxes for themselves and their families, will no longer have to do that. We believe it's a fair way to go. We had a commission take a look at that, and they came back with a number of recommendations, and we've implemented the majority of them. So with that, I know you've got many, many other questions about capital projects, about addressing the shortage of schools and the excessive number of portables in this region and right across the province. So this is your opportunity to ask myself and my colleagues as many questions as we can get in the 4 minutes we have left.
So the way this will work is that, because there will be lots of questions, we'll do a question and follow-up per outlet, because I know there's a few journalists per outlet here. We're going to go around the table. We're going to start at this end over here.
So if you have a question here, just indicate by raising your hands and I'll bring the microphone. Do you have a question?
Good evening, sir. I'm from Entertainment Magazine. I'm Professor Sean. In British Columbia, we have just one medicine college, and there are only 200 seats. Out of that, 50% seats goes to the overseas students who pay much more money on donation system. Citizens of Canada who are students, they are studying overseas, and we need to do something. Once the student goes overseas, it's very difficult to get the loans also from the bank. Why? Because if a student is studying in British Columbia, banks give the loan guarantee, government gives the guarantee. If the student goes overseas, banks also say that we need very heavy, collateral. And I know a couple of students who are suffering from this. When they want to come back, nobody salutes them. Nobody is ready to take them back. I want to know how much is a shortage of doctors in British Columbia, and what we are going to do on this. You are waiving the MSP, expanding it, I appreciate it, but we must have the proper paraphernalia as well as the system infrastructure to do the needful. Otherwise, our aging community will be in trouble. How to get the different done. Thank you.
Thank you for the question, and I turn to Harry because I know his has a child who went overseas to study to be a doctor, and she went to Dublin. So I was okay with that as an Irish descendant, but your point is very well made. We need to ensure that children, young people here in British Columbia have access to the training that they want and the training they deserve so they can continue to contribute to the BC economy. When it comes to seats at UBC, they are at a premium without any question. We also have medical seats or seats for doctors at UNBC in Prince George, and as well in UVic is just starting up in the next, I think either later this year or a beginning of the next calendar year. But in order to address the doctor shortage, we have to look at how it began. And we have not been investing in healthcare broadly speaking, and it's discouraging people from, once you leave to get an education, you're 9 times out of 10, you're likely to stay where you got that education, whether you're doing your residency, and I don't want to speak for Harry's family, but you end up staying where you got the education. We need to turn that around. So we need to create more spaces. We have universities and colleges in British Columbia that have the ability and the wherewithal to train young people to fill these what are increasingly vacant positions that are now going to students from elsewhere at a higher premium, and I'm going to do what I can to stop that. But we're also looking at how do we deliver services for people, and that's team-based healthcare. And you don't always need a general practitioner. When you go to a doctor's office or you go to a clinic, you can perhaps get the services you need from another qualified healthcare professional. So the Northern Health Authority has been piloting projects that they call primary health facilities, where there will be nurse practitioners, registered nurses, dietitians, therapists, social workers, the range of healthcare providers, and determining what type of service a patient needs can oftentimes streamline that healthcare delivery and also do it at least cost. A doctor costs more than a nurse practitioner, costs more than a registered nurse, costs more than a therapist. So finding the right person to deliver the service for patients is critically important. Success is being found in the north, where you have large geographic areas and small populations. We need to find ways now in our large urban centers, like Coastal Health and Fraser Health, where we can deliver continuing services to people without going to the highest cost service, making sure we get the best service. And that's the initiative that our government's going to undertake in the short term, but in the long term, we need more spaces and we need to train more doctors.
This is Rajendra Singh Pandey from Sachdivas. First of all, congratulations to the new government. My question is regarding the education of students. Talking about students abroad, but at home, when we are talking about 2001, Gordon Campbell taken over, the fees of the students gone threefold, means 300%. Never heard of anywhere. That's a very high increase. So students are waiting what they can have some relief on the education side, because the fees are very, very high, and everybody knows they are out tomorrow. So the second question is about the shortage of nurses. So want to hear our government how on those front how much more can be done. Thank you.
Thank you. And when it comes to costs or post-secondary education, increasingly young people are coming out of their diploma or degree program with large student debt. They take on student loans to pay for increased costs, not just for education, but for equipment, books, tools, if it's a skilled trade that they're trying to achieve. And government historically have been loaning the money and then seeking a repayment at 3 or 4% above the cost of borrowing the money. So we made an election commitment, and we fulfilled that commitment, to cut in half the interest that people have to pay on their student loans. Now, I would think that most people who have a student loan would prefer to see little or no interest paid, but there is an administration cost to all of us to manage those loans. But I think it should only be, the repayment should only be the minimum amount, not the maximum amount. So we've cut that in half. No longer will the government be making a profit off of loaning money to students. So that's a step in the right direction. In terms of addressing shortages, whether they're skilled trades, nurses, doctors, any other professionals required within our economy and within our communities, that requires a concerted effort over a long period of time. We've started, I think, on the right track. Minister Melanie Mark has created more spaces, more training spaces for Red Seal trades like welding, construction, pipe fitting, electricians, and so on. And we've also created more spaces in undergraduate universities so that we can get people into the vocations that they would want to follow, whether it's veterinary science, medicine, engineering, and so on. But it starts by making sure that people, young people, have some hope that when they get into a program, when they come out, there'll be something for them to do. Too often, young people start down a track of getting more education, and cost of living puts them back. Families aren't able to support that. We want to make sure that the spaces are there and available for British Columbians, and that we target through our labor management work, and Bruce is involved in that with other members of the government, Harry from Labor's perspective, to make sure that we're filling the vacancies that we have. And we're expecting over 1 million new job openings over the next 15 years, or is it 10 years? 15 years. And those are going to be largely skilled positions. We need to start training people for those vacancies now. That means encouraging the federal government to be more aggressive on the training side. The recent budget, the recent federal budget was a bit disappointing in terms of the monies available for what we call math, sciences, engineering, and a fourth one. See, that's why I only have 3 points. Yeah. So technologies. So we need to invest in those sectors that are going to be in demand in our future economy, and that means governments at all levels, federal and provincial, have to coordinate their labor market development plans, and that's the responsibility of two of the people sitting here at this table, as well as others, and we're committed to doing that. I believe profoundly in the power of education, whether it be your K-12 system or post-secondary education. Give people the tools to realize their full potential. That benefits individuals, it benefits families, it benefits communities. And so I'm committed to making sure that we provide the resources our institutions need so that we can have children come through with the credentials and the skills they need to realize their full potential.
Thank you.
My name is Naval Tandon. I am from Drishti magazine. My congratulations to NDP for their achievements and fulfilling the commitments in British Columbia. But I have a few concerns regarding the gas prices, which are going very high. On one hand, the government is cutting down, like you have abolished the toll tax, tolls, and as well as the MSP. But on the other hand, the gas prices are going up, and even the rental accommodations, the rent is going high in British Columbia, and students are getting very tough time to get the accommodations at affordable prices. So I would like to know from the government, like what government is going to do for these things, like gas prices and the rental.
I'll start with the rental piece because we have some control over that. Up until this budget, universities, Simon Fraser, UBC, UMBC, University of British Columbia in the Okanagan, and University of Victoria, were not able to build student housing without approval from the government. Now, I'll take Simon Fraser as an example, the Burnaby campus. They have a lot of land. They weren't able to build student housing on Simon Fraser land without the approval of the government. That means that they weren't getting the approvals to build that housing stock. If universities can build student housing that's paid for by the cost of housing when students enroll and they get into a residence, then that just is passed on to the students, and it's a reasonable price, and it can be paid for over a long period of time. Taking students out of the main rental market frees up housing space for individuals that are not students. So it just makes sense to me, and it made sense to us as a government, that we would allow universities and colleges that have real estate or have property, underutilized property, to build student housing. Now, that then passes the onus on to the institution to build the stock they need for the students that are registering, and they will again put that onto the market when the process is completed. Units are created, students move into them, and they're paid for over the life of the building through the annual rents or the annual costs for the students between September and April. And then the benefit to the community is more basement apartments for people who are struggling and need a low-cost accommodation. You're no longer fighting with students in September. That frees up more housing stock for regular people. When it comes to gas prices, the recent spike in gas prices is a result of refining capacity decline because of, I believe it's renovations or improvements. That's the story, anyway, from the gas sector, that there's been a decline in supply, which increases the costs at the pumps. But there's been no increase by our government in gas taxes or carbon taxes to this point. So we've seen a significant increase in costs as a direct result of what the industry calls market forces. I've been, over the years, been very critical of how convenient it is that on long weekends there seems to be a shortage of supply. Summer holidays come on, prices go up, and I've been critical of that as a elected representative, and I will continue to be critical of that. But at the same time, the federal government has mandated that all provinces have a carbon tax or a price on carbon of $50 a ton by 2022. That is a requirement of the federal government, and all provinces have to meet that. The good news is that in British Columbia, we've got 10 years experience with a carbon tax. We're at $30 a ton now, and our economy is the most robust in the country. So investors, innovators, business people have absorbed that impact, and they're continuing to succeed. So I'm confident that as we get the final $20 from $30 a ton to $50 a ton over the next 4 years, the economy is already, in British Columbia, we already understand as entrepreneurs and business people how to absorb those costs. The community has accepted that they often get passed on to consumers at the pump, for example. But we've been able to manage that, and we continue to have a very, very robust economy. That makes us world leaders, makes us certainly leaders in Canada, and I'm very proud of that. But it's not been our objective to increase costs on people, quite the contrary. As you said in your introduction, your preamble, we've been reducing costs. Medical services premiums cut in half, tolls eliminated, ICBC costs capped. We asked the Utilities Commission to freeze hydro rates for the next year. Unfortunately, the Utilities Commission did not grant that request, and we're going to have to now find new ways to go back to the Commission to make sure that we can protect people from increasing costs at BC Hydro. But it's important to remember that we've been in government for 7 months, and over the past 16 years, hydro rates have gone up 70%, and will continue to rise until we get costs under control. When we came to government, we anticipated we would have challenges with BC Hydro. We talked about that during the campaign. We did not anticipate a $1.3 billion problem at ICBC. We did not anticipate $750 million in costs to suppress fires in our forests up-country. So we had significant costs coming at us. We had to manage those, and rather than direct the Utilities Commission to impose a freeze on BC Hydro, we asked Hydro to go and make the argument, and they failed. That's on me, and I'll accept that. But I continue to maintain that we can't fix the problems of 16 years in just 16 weeks.
Thank you.
My name is Vinay from the Times of Canada. First of all, thank you very much, John Horgan and the entire team, for meeting South Asian media. Number two, people are talking good about you guys, so we must say thank you very much. So far, things are good.
So far.
Yes. I'm talking about the congestion on streets, especially transportation. In Surrey, some of the streets they are flooded, especially 84, 88, 72, 76. For reaching from point A to B, it takes a long time. There's too much traffic. On 84, there's construction going on for ages. It's not finishing at all. I don't know what's happening there. This leads my question towards LRT. I was talking to a couple of my friends yesterday at a coffee shop, and one of our friends was from India. And I was saying LRT is coming to Surrey. He said, what? I heard Canada is a forward country. I said, no, we have Skytrain as well. He said, this is even old. In Mumbai, we are building underground train these days. So what are you talking about? 50 years ago, 100 years ago, there used to be LRT. Should we move forward towards what is the future? So this is a concern about LRT.
Okay. Thank you. And we've been taking our direction on the regional transportation plan from the Mayor's Council. And I'm doing that quite deliberately and thoughtfully. I believe that the trade-offs that you need to make in an urban area as dynamic as Metro Vancouver, it's best to have those discussions with the people that are directly representing communities. So Mayor Hepner, Mayor Robertson, Mayor Moore, Mayor Stewart, and on it goes with the mayors, have gathered together and they've done the tussling back and forth on how do we take available resources from the federal government, from the provincial government, and from the municipal tax base. How do we take those limited resources and address the important transportation challenges in the region? And so I've taken direction from them, and their 10-year plan calls for LRT in Surrey. I'm anxious to get going on that before it becomes obsolete, I guess is the argument of your friend in the coffee shop. But what we need to do is invest in transportation alternatives in Surrey, because of all of the communities in the region, the area that has the least amount of public transit is right here. And we need to correct that. The LRT is the beginning of connecting up with the existing transit lines, making sure that we're also adding more buses, and at some points in the future, I would say high-speed rail from the airport through to Abbotsford, connecting our air transportation, and then south to Seattle and Portland. I had a great meeting with the governor of Washington early or late in 2017. They're very anxious to get high-speed rail into the Lower Mainland, and we have to reconfigure the current line to get away from White Rock and the beach, and we have to, if we're going to have high-speed rail, it has to be on a more appropriate location, and it strikes me that that location would terminate in Surrey rather than in downtown Vancouver. So again, Surrey becoming a hub for transportation is the likely outcome of that, whether it be from the airport through to Abbotsford and down through Langley or directly to Seattle. So there's a whole bunch of options available to us to be forward-looking, but we have to get going on something. We had a 10-year plan put together by the mayors in the region. They all made the different trade-offs that they had to make. I want to support that plan until a better one comes along.
Thank you.
With regards to affordability, we talked a lot about renters having an issue paying rent these days. That's the biggest number of people who have been evicted. Is just they can't afford to pay rent. Affordability was a big issue for your government. How are we going to specifically help this middle to lower income rental? And also you talked about farmer care before the election. Trudeau government just announced that they will be looking into it. Is there some type of collaboration going to happen with BC and the federal government in farmer care?
Well, on the farmer care side, we are eliminating deductibles for people with an income under $30,000. That's just the beginning. Now that the federal government has also stepped up, these are opportunities for collaboration in our next budget. But drug prices are a big, big problem, and we've heard story after story recently where state-of-the-art, life-changing pharmaceuticals are coming online, and they're not yet covered by medical services, they're not yet covered by pharmacare, but families, oftentimes with young children needing access to these new transformative drugs, are turning to government. And we have a responsibility to make sure that we're using the best drug available, but also in a cost-effective way. And I think also it falls to pharmaceutical companies to recognize that once they create these transformative opportunities for families, that they shouldn't see that as an opportunity for windfall profits. It's an opportunity to make life better for people. I'm not suggesting that they develop these drugs without any compensation, but sometimes that compensation is quite excessive. And I think there needs to be a serious discussion between the federal, provincial, and pharmaceutical sector about how we integrate new transformative drugs into our pharmacare program. When it comes to renters, it's a high priority for me personally and also for my team. We took some initial steps in this budget to increase the SAFER grants and other rental supplements for low-income people, but increasingly we have to move into the middle class that are finding themselves in a position where housing is debilitating. Can't afford to get into the market to buy, finding it difficult to find appropriate rental housing for families. So part of our plan in this 30-point housing plan was not just to deal with speculation and demand, but it was to bring on more supply. That means working with municipal governments to ensure that when we approve and build new transit opportunities, that we're building density along those corridors, taking advantage of the opportunity to connect people with transit and where they need to go and work every day. That requires a concerted, coordinated effort, and that's why I appointed Selena Robinson, member from Coquitlam, Maillardville, responsible for not just municipal affairs, but also housing and TransLink, because all three are critically important. If we have disagreements between any of those three pieces, it'll be more difficult to bring costs down for people, provide services and bring costs down. So bringing on more supply, assisting developers by having more density, they can build more rental units. If you can only go 6 stories, you're going to sell those units. If you can go 12 stories, you might rent them. And so that's the type of incentive that the development community wants to see. More density allows them to, they make more money with each additional unit. The construction sector is quite clear on that. And so we need to work with municipalities to find a place where we can build more supply, not just market-driven for purchase, but also rent purpose-built housing. And that means tying it to transit. That makes sense to the public, it makes sense to the municipalities, and it makes sense to us.
Thank you, Premier.
Thanks a lot. My name is Harun Ghaffar. I'm from 93.1 and 89.1 Red FM. Apart from this transportation issue, there are a couple of serious concerns in Surrey as well. One is the new hospital, which the health minister announced in December last year that it's in the...
Should it be done by now?
No, it's in the concept planning phase. So what's the update on that thing? And the other thing is the portable classrooms in Surrey. It's still there, and what's the update on it? And the third thing, I'm so sorry, it's a third question. That's the Trans Mountain pipeline issue.
Yeah.
I just wanted to ask, is it any possibility that we can see the resolution very soon on this issue?
Okay, thank you for all 3 questions. I'll start. I was being glib about the new hospital. Minister Dix has been very diligent going through all of the communities in British Columbia that desperately need increased access to acute care facilities. Richmond, Burnaby, the interior, Terrace, Kamloops, and so on. The community after community is having a crisis in capital for health services, and we're doing our level best to meet that demand. And I give full marks to Minister Dix for his diligence. He's been traveling around, talking to people. He's made the announcement on the concept plan for the new hospital here. Again, my colleagues were driving that issue, and Adrian's been attentive to that. And I think of the overtures that the people at this table made during the election campaign. We're going to realize that, and we're well on the way to do so. When it comes to the portable question, that was a personal commitment I made, and I remember very well standing with Jay Ruppin and Harry particularly when I made the commitment to address that issue, and they both, I thought that the smiles might break their faces, but I was serious about it because kids in Surrey are in portable classrooms while kids in other communities are not. And there seems to be issue after issue after issue where people in Surrey were not getting the same shake as other communities. And that, I think, reflects why there's such a strong representation in government now of New Democrat MLAs who stood up for people, talked about the issues that matter to them, and now we're doing our level best to deliver on them, whether it be with respect to transportation, whether it be trucking, whether it be taxis, whether it be tolls. We're addressing all of those issues to the best of our ability, as quickly as we possibly can. When it comes to continuing to see the extraordinary growth in Surrey in terms of residential construction and additional housing units that will be brought on, social housing, not-for-profit housing, as well as market-driven housing, all of those homes are likely to have families who have children who need access to schools. So we have a serious deficit, far greater than I had anticipated when we made our commitments on portables, but that does not diminish our commitment. We want to build as many schools as we possibly can in the time we have available. We need to work with the municipality and the school board to make that happen. We put aside the largest amount of capital in the 3-year fiscal plan, $14.8 billion for school. It's over 15 now? Thanks, Harry. This is growing as I sit here. To build schools, to build hospitals, to build roads, to build bridges, and to build transit. It's incredibly important to have a government that has the resources, not because of prudence by anyone, it's because of the hard work of the people of British Columbia, and particularly the hard work of the people south of the Fraser, who have been continuing to pay taxes into the federal treasury, but not receive the benefits from that. We're going to try and turn that around, and we've been over the past 7 months focusing on some of the issues I've talked about already, but building new schools requires partnership from the municipality, requires partnership from the school board, and we're going as quickly as we can, but there are some administrative obstacles in the way, but we're not going to be deterred by that. You will see school construction start to tick up in the months ahead, and at the end of our term here, we're going to be doing our level best to make sure that the appropriate number of schools have been built to meet the growing demand that's happening as we speak. As new permits are approved by the municipality, we want to make sure that the school board is working hand in hand with them and the provincial government so that the schools that those new communities will need will be there when those houses are filled. Oh, in the pipeline, I'm sorry. I'd almost forgot about that. Bruce and I and George Chow and Lisa Baer traveled to Asia, to China, Korea, and Japan as a first trade mission by the new government. And when we came back, I was met by a gruff phone call from the Premier of Alberta. Before we left, the Minister of Environment and the Cabinet had agreed that it was appropriate for British Columbia to talk about what the consequences could be of a disastrous diluted bitumen spill in British Columbia. And so we put together, Minister Heyman put together an intentions paper which was released yesterday. And when we started out the month of February, we had 5 principles that we were going to discuss with people. Not introduce, but to discuss with people to ensure that we were doing what we can to protect British Columbians' economy, their environment, and their coast from a catastrophic event. The government of Alberta objected to that. I spoke with Premier Notley. I disagreed with her. I said we were going to proceed. She embarked upon an unlawful trade dispute by restricting against the trade agreements that we have signed as provinces under the Canadian Free Trade Agreement to restrict access of BC wine to the Alberta market. I did not want to increase the debates in the media and affecting adversely the BC economy when all we were proposing to do was to do what we felt was right, and that was to stand up for our coast and make sure that the people of British Columbia knew they had a government that would protect their interests in the event of a catastrophic accident, in the event of. So we undertook that initiative, and in discussions with the federal government, the Prime Minister and other representatives from the federal government, we agreed to put the 5th issue, that is to regulate the amount of diluted bitumen that would come through British Columbia, which is our jurisdiction. We would refer that question to the courts to ensure that we did have the right to proceed. I invited Alberta and I invited Canada to join with me, and that we would do it together to demonstrate to the people of BC and the people of Canada that we wanted to be reasonable and rational about protecting what is in all of our country's interest. Our coastal communities depend on a pristine environment for seafood, for tourism, for a whole host of other reasons, and it's not just about Alberta. This is about Canada. So I said, let's do this together. They declined, so we're going alone. We're referring. We have a legal team that's going to refer the question of this fifth element to the Supreme Court eventually to confirm our jurisdiction. So we are currently heading to court. I should also say there are 2 court cases that we're already involved in. One, which is about the National Energy Board process, broadly speaking. We believe that that process did not adequately take into consideration the risks to our economy and to our environment. Straightforward argument, we're in court about that. The second point that we're in court on is the National Energy Board allowing Kinder Morgan to overrule the bylaws of the City of Burnaby. None of you in this room can arbitrarily say, I'm sorry, City of Burnaby, I don't acknowledge your rules. I don't acknowledge your bylaws. So I believe, and my colleagues believe, and certainly the City of Burnaby believes, that it's unlawful for the National Energy Board to give rights to one group of people to overrule the laws and the bylaws of the City of Burnaby. So we're supporting Burnaby in that case. With respect to my relationship with Ottawa and Edmonton, we are happily working on a whole host of issues: childcare, cooperation between the federal and provincial government, housing issues, transportation issues, a whole range of issues where I believe we're making very positive inroads for the people of the province and ultimately the people of Canada. But the Kinder Morgan pipeline is something that we campaigned against. This is not a surprise to anyone. It certainly shouldn't have been a surprise to the government of Alberta.